Hi, and welcome to the Raw Heart and Soul podcast. Today, as I mentioned in the intro, I have with me Scott Darlow. Welcome, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tanya. I appreciate it.
No problem. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you are doing now, and then we'll go into where you grew up?
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, I'm a singer-songwriter, I guess is my job. Father, husband, 3 kids, live in Melbourne. So play music for a living and do a lot of stuff around education as well. I'm an Aboriginal man from Yorta Yorta country, so I sing and speak in a lot of high schools around the world, playing music as a vehicle to connect with students and teachers, but then talking about Australian history and the effects of colonisation around the world, helping people understand how we've gotten to the point that we currently are at for Indigenous people all around the world.
When did you start playing music, and when did you realise that this was going to be an avenue for you in storytelling?
So I was 5. I started playing the cornet at the age of 5. My mum and dad were involved with the Salvation Army. They were Salvation Army officers.
Yeah.
And so our childhood was, getting dragged along to church where they had the brass bands. Probably one of my first memories is of sitting there, looking at this brass band and thinking, man, that trombone's the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And pleading to be allowed to play a trombone, but my arm wouldn't reach the slide. So they gave me a cornet instead, just like a small trumpet. And that was it, And then from there, I started playing guitar in grade 4. I think I was in grade 4, and Mr. Page, bless him, he was the one cool teacher in our primary school.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were probably more cool teachers, but back then he seemed like the one cool teacher, and he taught me how to play guitar. And then ever since then, it's sort of music was just this thing that I've done that I love. Just started playing saxophone in uni, and I was a brass and woodwind player and teacher for a long time, and then but simultaneously playing guitar and writing songs. And so it was just always this thing that I did, and I think it was never really a decision to make it an occupation until sort of I spent a couple of years as a high school teacher, and and that was good, but not really wasn't really my passion, I don't think, looking back. And there's a few things that happened along the way that where I had an epiphany that life is all about figuring out what you're gifted in, what you're passionate about, and trying to combine those two things to make a living. For me, I'm gifted in music, and I'm gifted with people, and I'm passionate about people. So trying to combine those things to make a living, that's sort of where it's landed.
What did your parents say when you decided that you were going to stop being a school teacher, or was it something that they did with you?
No, look, by that stage, I was married and had a kid, and it was more what my wife said really than what my
What did she say then?
Oh no, she was great. She's always been very supportive, and I think it's funny, Dana, she's always known that. She met me when I met her, I was actually I was a high school teacher, and but she knew pretty quickly that if I wasn't passionate about what I was doing, I was going to be fairly miserable.
Yeah.
And so she's amazingly supportive. So no dramas there.
What do you say to people who, because the podcast that I do, this is called Raw Heart and Soul, so it's about talking to people who have found or living their soul purpose, and that's like the way you say that makes it sounds like it comes across really easy, like it was realize that you weren't passionate about teaching.
And it didn't happen in a day. It was a long-term thing. It happened actually. My dad passed away. He'd been an amazing dude who changed a lot of people's lives, and then in his sort of mid to late 40s, he had a breakdown, and he'd had a very traumatic childhood as well. And he had a breakdown, and he went from being this amazing, life-changing guy to a sad alcoholic who died as a result of his drinking. So it was really at his funeral where I realized, life is really short. My daughter was 6 weeks old, and I remember looking at her, and then looking at him as he lay in an open coffin. We looked at the lid open, before anyone rocked up, and just realizing that one day my daughter will say goodbye to me, and at that point, what will she say about how I spent my time? Because the reality is that on this planet, we all get excited about currency. Everybody's got currency that drives them. Some people, the currency that drives them is their money, is their income. But the stupidity of that is that money is very fleeting. You earn it, you keep it, you spend it, save it, give it away. We donate it, we gamble it. It's actually probably the most fleeting currency there is. For a lot of people, the currency that drives them is their possessions, and they've got the flash house and the flash car. But we've seen tragically in the last 18 months bushfires and floods, and people have lost homes, but then they rebuild slowly, and and the new house, a good mate of mine, he lost his house out near Whittlesea, 10, 11, 12 years ago with those terrible fires that happened then.
Yeah.
But when he rebuilt finally, and not to say that it wasn't traumatic, but when he did rebuild, his new house is far flashier than his old one ever was. The thing that we don't often realize, or we do, but we pay it scant regard, is the fact that time is the only currency that you have that you can't replace and you can't budget it.
Yeah.
It's tragic, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I had a close mate die a couple of weeks ago unexpectedly.
So we can now that's Michael Gudinski.
Yeah, Michael, and he was as fit as he'd been for 20 years. He'd lost weight. He was working out with a trainer. Like, he was so vibrant and full of life, and then he goes to bed one night and has a heart attack, and that's it, and you don't know. So the reality is, life is, to me anyway, life is all about how are you going to best spend your one true currency.
Yeah.
And I realized I'm not passionate about teaching kids music at a high school. It's not what I'm here to do, So it was a process. It didn't happen straight away. I'd started making an album, but that was an expensive process. You got to pay for it yourself because I didn't have a record deal. So in the meantime, I went to find other work to pay for that. I worked as a spruiker out the front of stores at shopping centres talking about, $30 pleather coats at Miller's Fashion Club. And, I hated that job. I did a heap of work that I hated. I worked door to door selling water for Never Fail. There was...
But then means to an end.
That's what it took to get it done.
Yeah. So if you know what that passion is, then that's...
Yeah, exactly. I sung covers in pubs for way longer than I wanted to, singing K-San and Flame Trees, $300 a night. That's what it took to get it done. But, it's in the long run, it certainly has been worthwhile because, now I'm in a position where I'm getting to do something I'm very passionate about and getting paid to do it. And, I'm people are like, oh man, you're so lucky. Well, no, I'm not really. I just worked bloody hard and I haven't given up when people told me no. Yeah. That's really all it came down to.
Who told you no along the way?
Oh, who didn't tell me no?
How did you respond to that? Was your response that some people can take that two ways? Some people can go, well, I'm going to show you exactly what I mean and prove you wrong. Or do you internalize that and do it for yourself?
No, there's a few things there. Like, one of them is, firstly, I tell my kids this all the time, like, everybody on this planet's got an opinion. Everybody's got an opinion. So what you got to do from a young age, I learned this, you pick 5 people that you really care about, that you value and you respect. And when they have an opinion on you or what you're doing, you take that to heart and you really consider it. Doesn't mean you agree with it straight away, but you consider it and you take it on board. Anybody else who's got a commentary on your life who's not in those 5 people, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That can be good, that can be bad, because especially doing what I do, like, people are going to pump you. Like, I mean, consider this. I work in an occupation in a field where I go to work and do my job and people clap. Like, that's insane, really, when you think about it. It's not like you're a school teacher and you finish teaching a lesson, all those kids stand up and applaud. It doesn't happen in any other field except for this and maybe sport. Yeah. So, and similarly, people are going to pot you even when you're doing your best. So, the reality is, if you're in my 5, great, I'll take that on board. If you're not, thank you very much. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if people who are in your handful of people that you respect, if you've got an opinion, then you take that on board and you act on it properly. When I started writing songs and I got to be good friends with a guy. His name is Paul Coleman, and he's a Christian. He's a Christian singer in that sort of gospel scene. And he's an Aussie, but he ended up in America and got nominated for a Grammy Award, and an amazing songwriter and an artist. And so I was young and I just started writing songs, and I remember hanging out at his house the first time we'd actually spent time together, and I played him a couple of my songs that I'd written, and I remember he looked at me and he goes, Scotty, you've written some really good songs, and I sat there and my chest puffed out a bit, and then he looked at me and he goes, but your singing's ordinary and your guitar playing's terrible. And honestly, I was crushed. I wanted to just dig a hole and climb into that hole, but as I left his house, I thought about it. I thought, well, he's got nothing to lose by telling me that stuff. And this is somebody that I really respect as an artist and a songwriter and a performer. And I went away and I got some singing lessons for 12 months and I went and got some guitar lessons and I worked hard at my craft. And, 12 months later, we kept in touch as mates. And 12 months later, he helped me make my first record because he's seen that I'd taken that advice on board and worked hard at it. So yeah, you have your 5 people, but if somebody, and at that point in my life, he was in those 5 people, so I took his advice really seriously. Yeah. So, but again, there were other guys that I played in bands with who were like, oh, mate, you can't sing. I was playing trumpet in this one band, and I said, oh, I want to sing. And the boys in that band were like, oh, mate, you're no good. We're not going to let you sing in this band. And I was just like, well, you know what? That's cool, but you're not in my five, so I'm just going to keep doing it. And I'm just going to keep going, and I'm going to get my singing lessons.
You find like the band that will let you sing.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you also just keep working at it, just keep working at it, and just that's all good. I'll do my own thing. So yeah, just keep on keeping on half the time. It's the battle.
Who are your 5 people at the moment?
Probably, it's pretty stable. It's Dana and my kids, obviously, but I'd probably count them as one. And then there's a few different very close friends that I've got. My best mate over in Perth, Ross, he'd be another. The boys that I play in a band with, I take what they have to say pretty seriously. My agent, Scotty, he's somebody that I really respect as well. And so there's different people in my life that I give permission to speak into my life in that way. But Dana certainly would be number one.
Yeah, Brene Brown. Do you know who Brene Brown is?
No.
She's a motivational speaker in America. She's actually one of the top motivational speakers in the US. But she talks about this, and she says, if you're not in my arena, if you haven't, someone can't walk in your shoes, but they can certainly be in the arena with you. And that's what you're talking about, those top 5 people, those close 5 people. But if you're not in my arena, don't try and tell me how to run my arena, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just about being wise and just, knowing who you are. I mean, that's the first thing, is you got to really know who you are and be comfortable in your skin, and then from there you can allow other people to journey with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think everybody's got those people in their life, just whether they've actually realized and recognized that that's what it is and that's where they belong.
Very cool. How important is your culture to you, and why?
Yeah, look, obviously it's incredibly important. But I think culture is important to all of us, I mean, that's the reason why so many middle-aged Aussie white men, middle-class men, rail against being told what jokes they can tell. And, that's why Pauline Hanson gets votes, is because people misguidedly think that their culture is being taken from them. They confuse eras with culture. And I don't want to get down that path of discussion, but, culture is important to everybody. We all like to celebrate who we are and where we're from. And, and I firmly believe if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going, So I think that's one of the sadnesses for me in this country. Traveling's, I say anybody who really wants to understand their purpose in life needs to get on a plane and go overseas, because, look, honestly, knowing the broader picture of the humanity that we share this planet with is really powerful. And, when you do that, you see that there's a lot of Aussies, like, I'll meet Aussies all the time, and I'll be like, where are you from? Well, I'm from here. Oh yeah, but where are you from? Well, I'm Australian. Well, yeah, but going back, say, beyond 100 years, where are you from? And a lot of people don't even know. Like, oh, Europe somewhere, I think, or, and it's interesting. I was having a yarn with a fella up in Broome. I was in Broome last week, and this bloke was hanging out with some teachers. And this one fella who took me on a bit of a tour around Broome in his 4-wheel drive, which was amazing. But he was telling me that he got to go and visit the village in Scotland that his family had come from 150 years ago. Yeah. He goes, the minute I set foot in that village, he goes, my heart was connected to that ground. I can't explain it, but I knew that this was where I belonged. And when you think about it from even a physiological viewpoint, your ancestors for thousands of years ate the food that grew in that land.
Yeah.
They drank the water from the streams in that land. Like, your physical DNA and molecules, and it's all made up from that earth. You are connected to that country.
I agree.
So there's that just from a physiological standpoint, but also from a spiritual standpoint as well.
Yeah.
So I'm an Aboriginal man from a Yorta country on my mum's side of the family, but my dad's side of the family was Scottish convicts, who, his great-great-great-grandfather was transported to Tasmania as a teenage boy for stealing fruit with his brother. Yeah. So one of the things that I'd planned on doing it sort of 2 years ago, 18 months ago, when I was touring England, and I ran out of time, but we were all set to drive up to Glasgow. Just outside of Glasgow, there's this one village where my dad's family lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years as fishermen. Yeah. And I'm really keen. I want to go and check that out as well. So, yeah, absolutely.
Where did your parents meet?
They both were the son and daughter of Salvation Army officers. So they met at church. And Mum had always, you know, she tells a story that she gave her heart to Jesus, as she puts it, when she was 8, and knew from that point on that that's all she wanted to do, was just to serve him. And so Dad, I think the story goes that Dad actually proposed by suggesting that they go into full-time ministry together. That was his proposal. And
that was his story. He knew he needed a door.
He was a salesman. I think he probably knew that she was out of his league, because she was, and the only way that he was going to get her to say yes was to offer to go and become Salvation Army officers together. So yeah, they did that, and both of their parents had been, like, Mum's dad was a full colonel and Dad's dad was a lieutenant colonel, if that means anything to you. So they were both kind of senior in that organisation. So yeah, that was the thing. And then Mum and Dad obviously ended up in that industry and worked as salvo officers for 20 years. And so, you know, so that took us all around the world as well as kids.
So what religion is that?
It's just Protestant. So yeah, similar to Anglican, I guess, in some ways. You know, just slight differences in the way that they go about it. You know, it's kind of like, I always think with Christianity, it's sort of like, you know, you got Baptists and Catholics and you know, Pentecostals and all these different varieties. I liken it to, like, everyone gets hungry, you know, everyone needs a feed. Some people want to go to KFC, some want Chinese, some want a hamburger. You know, you go about it a different way, but they all end up getting a feed in the same way. So, you know, they all kind of believe in the same thing. They believe in God, the Father, and Jesus, the Son, who died on the cross and was resurrected 3 days later. So all those tenets of belief are there, and they just sort of they live it out in different kinds of ways, I think.
Different adaptations of the scripture, I guess.
Yeah, so the Salvos, their real thing is they're just very passionate about social justice.
Yeah.
So they do that really well. There's other things that they don't do very well. Like all organisations, I guess.
Definitely.
But, you know, they do that social justice side of things really well. So, yeah, and my dad, he was a social worker, so that was a good fit for him. He ran refugee camps and ran social welfare and ran a retirement village at one point. He ran an alcoholic refuge at one point as well here in Melbourne. So, yeah. How
has that affected your beliefs? Do you believe in, like, what is your spirituality, or what is your practice? Or do you?
I believe in God, and I think Jesus is his son, and I'm passionate about that, but I'm not so sure about the majority of his followers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You know, I read the scriptures. I think the Bible is amazing, and I read the scriptures and I see this kid who was born out of wedlock in the Middle East, who fled Israel to Egypt as a refugee to avoid being persecuted and killed.
Who wasn't a Christian at the time.
Sorry?
Who wasn't a Christian.
Who, Jesus?
Yeah.
Well, he couldn't have been, because the Christianity didn't begin until he'd been killed on the cross. So from a time perspective, it was impossible for him to be a Christian.
Yeah.
But, you know, here's this guy who was very clear. He talked about, you know, when your neighbour, you know, shows you evil, you repay evil with kindness, turn the other cheek.
Mm-hmm.
Harder for a rich man to enter the gates of heaven than a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. All of these things, you know, he talked about embracing just having enough to survive and looking after those around you. And I see a large percentage of modern day Christianity that are prosperity driven, and you know, I mean, we look at our Prime Minister, who claims to be a Christian, and he couldn't be more harsh on refugees if he tried, you know.
Yeah.
So I think Jesus is amazing. Who he was, who he is amazing. But the place that the modern church has found itself in is in my opinion, is a long way off being what Jesus stood for.
Yeah, I totally agree. I grew up as a Catholic and grew up in Canberra, in a very isolated, and now what I see as an isolated community in terms of how much it's pretty much what you see in Parliament right now is the way I grew up in Canberra. Very insular in thinking, and as much as we thought we were in a very multicultural area of Canberra, growing up there and then I moved to Queensland, lived up there for 6 years, then moved to Melbourne, lived for 20 years, have over the last 10 years just realized how insular and how protected I was, and how small that world really was for me growing up, and how I grew up in what I would now consider a racist family, and racism and like homophobic as well. So those things are things that I'm trying to grow through and learn about myself right now. And I wouldn't say that I like I had an interesting thing happen last year where one of my family members said, we're worried about what you're posting, we're worried about what you're quoting, we're worried about you leaving the Catholic Church. I left the Catholic Church a long time before last year and evolved and spiritually changed and grew a long time before I actually left the church. And that it's an interesting thing because COVID has brought out a lot of perspective for me, but I think for humans across the world as well, in being like what you were just talking about before, knowing, not even knowing, but learning that time is short, and starting to question our programming and question how we live.
Yeah, and I think, it's important to understand that we're all raised with the lenses that are not only our parents but our grandparents and great grandparents. You grow up wearing generational lens.
Absolutely.
And to be honest with you, it's not even that your family are probably racist or any of those things. It's probably that they're just not educated as well as they could have been in different things. So, the challenge, I think, is when you have your own moments of enlightenment, and look, we all have them, I have them, we all have them. When we have those moments of awakening, the challenge is to then be able to gently, in love, bring the people around you on that journey with you. And what we do as humans at times is we get impatient and we get annoyed and we get, well, how do you not get it? Because I understand it now. And we've got to stop and remember that people are on their own journey and they're coming along at different paces. So that to me is the challenge, and trying to give people the patience and the grace that sometimes they need to get along at the journey. Because no one likes being shouted at or told they're wrong,
Right.
Just get back up. So yeah, that's the challenge, but it's not easy at times. I remember when I first started dating my wife, and we fell in love instantly, and we were engaged within 5 months and married sort of pretty soon after. And she had a job at that point at the Melbourne Zoo, and look, I'd grown up with two brothers in a very blokey, typical Aussie house, and in those early days at the zoo, there was a lot of the keepers and the people who worked there were gay, men and women, and that was a real journey for me, because I was pretty much, I'd quit teaching and I was unemployed part of the time during the day, and I'd work nights, doing covers, and so I spent a lot of time at the zoo just hanging out with people who work there, and and getting alongside of all of these people that once upon a time I probably would have, if I'm really honest, wouldn't have understood and wouldn't have been that accepting of, but they ended up becoming some really close friends, and that completely did a 180 on my understanding, and I was really embarrassed about my own behavior prior to that awakening, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
But for me, that the issue then was to try and educate mates and people around me that had maybe not had those moments, and we're talking over 20 years ago now, so so that's the challenge, is bringing people along for the journey in love.
Yeah, in that moment though, I have felt shame about some of the things that I have said and done in the past that perhaps
absolutely
hurt people. And
absolutely, but I think you've got to be pragmatic about it as well, and go, you can only do what you can only do with what you've been given at the time.
Yeah.
So like, there's no point beating yourself up over something that's happened that you can't change, and that you were just doing the best with what you had at the time. You know? So life's far too short to carry that sort of baggage around.
That brings me to some of the questions that I had in regards to your journey, because for the most part, from someone who doesn't really understand First Nations Australians, you would probably come across as looking like a white person. So how has that, have you felt that over the years that you've had to defend your culture because of the way you look?
Yeah, to a degree sometimes. Sometimes, but look, it's one of those things that people are becoming more and more aware that with Aboriginal people, if you've got a mum or a dad or even a grandparent who's not Aboriginal, often you could look like that side of the family. So, but again, look, if people want to question me, or that's their issue. My mob know who I am, my family know who I am, I know who I am. That's really all that matters.
Yeah.
And if people don't like it, well, it's all right. They can continue not liking it, but I'll keep on doing what I'm doing, and they can do what they're doing. And it doesn't really worry me, to be honest.
What do you want to say through your music, and what comes through in your music?
All kinds of different things, all kinds of different things. Like this record that there's an EP releasing in a couple of months' time with the next single. There's a song in there called "You Can't See Black in the Dark," which is sort of about the need to be educated and the need to self-educate. And there's a lot of people who run around going, "Oh, you know what? We never got told this. We never got taught this stuff when I was in school," and that's true. But we live in the day and age of the internet where there's never been a greater opportunity to be educated. So there's political songs there, like "Forgotten Australia" is similarly is about our stance on refugees. But there's a song on there called "Falling to Pieces," which I think will possibly be the next single, which I wrote about my dad dying. Just a heartfelt song about dad. "Bind the Hands of Time" I wrote with Diesel, and that's a song about just being present in the moment and living our best lives. So there's a lot of different themes in it. I write songs about whatever I'm feeling in that moment.
Tell me about your speaking in high schools. Are you still doing that at the moment or not?
Yeah, flat out. Yep, absolutely.
That's cool. Tell me about is it FLUTE, your anagram?
Yeah, FLUTE, an acronym. FLUTE is an acronym, stands for forgiveness, love, understanding, tolerance, and empathy. Whether I'm speaking in schools or even in corporate groups, it's just sort of it's an acronym that I encourage people to try to use and wear a FLUTE lens, and in the way we choose to encounter the people around us, and just try and show a little bit more forgiveness to everybody that's wronged us, a little bit more love, understanding, tolerance, and empathy. And, the challenge is if we all made a decision to show a little bit more of those 5 things to everybody we encounter, our societies would probably be going infinitely better. And it's just little by little, but it's death by 1,000 cuts, and it makes a huge difference when a whole community embrace that philosophy.
When Kevin Rudd announced that Australia was sorry.
Yep.
Is that 10 years ago now?
Yeah.
The 13th of February. How far do you think we have come from there? Like, do you think we have improved?
Look, we have and we haven't. We have in a sense that I think education has really leapfrogged ahead and people are a lot more aware about not only the issues, but also the causes of, First Nation stuff. But I think, until we start seeing the life expectancy become more
together.
Yeah, come close together, and the number of juvenile kids in prison.
Yeah.
The juveniles in maximum security prisons around this country, the majority are Indigenous, and we make up 4% of the population. Until we start seeing those sorts of things get addressed properly and significantly, then the answer to that question is no. But there has been some change, but not enough for my liking, to be honest.
How can we improve?
We've got to get kids educated. That's the bottom line. Is at the moment we have got, I think 65-70% of all Australian adults have finished year 12. About 5% of Indigenous adults have finished year 12. So what that means is you don't have First Nations kids growing up seeing uncles, aunties, mums, dads, cousins, brothers, sisters finishing school, going to university. From a role modelling perspective, there are a lot of Aboriginal kids that you meet who truly believe if I don't play AFL footy, I have no future, because the only role models they've ever seen escape a generation's deep poverty cycle have been footballers. So that's what we've got to fix that. We've got to get kids educated, and at the moment we're going backwards in that regard. Like, you look at what's happening in Shepparton. I'm not sure if you've seen that, but they've combined all the schools in the Shepparton area into one super school of 2,000 kids, and it's a nightmare. It doesn't cater to people from a completely different cultural background.
Hang on, for a second, Scott.
They've
combined one school in Shepparton.
They've all the high schools in Shep are now one super school, and so they've got 2,000 kids on campus.
On one campus.
For one. It's going to be on one campus. They're building it at the moment. They're in a temporary campus at the moment. It's a nightmare. You've got teachers quitting. You've got teachers on stress leave. The reality is that we've got Jewish kids go to Jewish schools because their home life is different, their background is different, their culture is different, and their parents want that reflected in the way their education is presented to them, right? And they can afford to have that done. Steiner kids go to Steiner schools because their parents want that different kind of education, because their kids are different and they want that culturally reflected. Catholic kids go to Catholic schools because their beliefs and their culture are different at home and they want that reflected in their schools. and the way their education is presented to them. And what we do is we turn around and go, right, we're going to have one school in Shepparton with 2,000 kids in it. And if you blackfellas can't understand it or make it work, that's bad luck. And then they sit there and scratch their heads and wonder why there's kids sitting out the front of the South Shepparton shops at 2 o'clock on a Wednesday, right? So governments are not truly interested in long-term change. The governments are interested in 3 years because that's how long they're elected for.
Right.
They're the biggest hypocrites going around. So, at the end of the day, it's got to come back to communities and to our own Indigenous communities and to, the broader sense. I mean, you talk about the church earlier, but if the church were fair income about following the teachings of Jesus, they would be neck deep in getting education sorted for Indigenous kids. But they're not. So, there's a lot of issues, but the main one to me is we've got to get kids educated. That's number one.
Yeah, agree. Can you explain to me, and this was on your website, intercultural understanding?
Intercultural understanding on my website.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I think just intercultural understanding is just, it's got to go both ways. It's us understanding the differences, I guess, between, and I say this is somebody who's got, Australian/Scottish convict heritage and Indigenous heritage. It's understanding that we've both got stuff that we can learn from each other and can make us better, and it really just comes down to listening. A lot of this stuff just comes down to listening and really understanding and hearing where we're each coming from and learning and allowing the best of what we both have to offer to make us the best versions of ourselves that we can be, is probably the simplest way I can put that.
Yeah, and so that comes from education of children again.
Well, yeah, but it just comes from listening as well, and just listening to each other's stories and journeys, and being prepared to actually listen and not sitting there waiting to speak, which is what a lot of people do.
Yeah,
we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should probably listen in that percentage.
Twice as much as what we talk.
Mm.
Do you believe that you're practicing your soul purpose, or do you think that there is more to your journey?
I think everything in life is for seasons. Everything's for a season. So at the moment, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, but hey, that may change. And if it does, if and when it does, if Bunjil Creator, God, same thing, if he turns around next week and goes, hey, you know what, there's a better way you can achieve what you're supposed to be doing without picking up a guitar, I'd be fine with that. I'm not tied to this forever. At some point I'll shuffle off and do something else.
I'm going to ask you a question that I heard you ask somebody else when you were interviewing someone. It was on a YouTube clip.
Okay.
What is it in your culture or where you're from that you think is amazing and the world needs to know more about?
Oh, look, it's a good one. That was the one I asked Otis on.
I love that question. It was really good.
Yeah. Look, I think for me, and it's something that we all should know, but it's just the importance and the value in older people. I think have been lost in this generation, in this society. And I think for Aboriginal people, we've got a much better understanding of just the value and the amazingness of age and wisdom, and having those old people in our lives, and just the respect that we have for our elders. I think everybody could do better to get alongside of their the elders that they have in their lives while they have access to them and grow and learn from them more.
How are you teaching your children to do that?
Just hopefully through an everyday example of who I am as a man and who Dana is as a woman. One of the things, I probably had a head start at it. One of the things that as a kid, my dad got me a job in a nursing home, feeding old people. So for 2 years, me and my mate from school, Dan Stepini, we used to go into the Hollywood private hospital and we'd do feeds 3 nights a week, 4 nights a week. So they were switched on here, but their bodies were packed up. So we'd feed them, they called it Vitamized. It was just a blended green mush. And spoon feed these old people like they were infants. And it was traumatic because you get close to them and they die.
Yeah.
But I also learned a lot of stuff. I probably learned more in those 2 years from those people than I did for a long, for just about than anything else. And one of that was the value of wisdom. One of those, I learned the value of not holding grudges, because all the sad, miserable, bitter old people seem to all tell you every day who had wronged them.
Yeah.
So the value of wisdom, I think.
It's a great answer. I'm going to circle back to Michael Gudinski again. What did he mean to you, and where does he leave the music industry?
Yeah, look, Michael was just, it's funny, since he passed, I've had my phone, the day he died, my phone just blew up with people. And I think because he was such a big personality that everybody who sort of knew that I knew him wanted to sort of get a bit on the inside goss maybe, or I don't know, or feel connected to it in some way because he was such a big personality. But so I understand that. But a lot of them were kind of concerned about what it meant for my career because I'm signed. I think I'm the last artist he ever signed actually to a label.
Yeah.
You know, he was working closely with me on the releases that we've had and that we've got coming up. And so a lot of those people were concerned about what this means or meant or means for my career. Mm-hmm. But truthfully, like, I don't really even care about that. I'm just sad that my mate's gone. You know, he was just such a rad dude. He was amazingly funny. I mean, I've never met anyone who could talk more than me until I met Michael. He had a million ideas happening at any given time. He was just more capable of doing so many things at once than anyone I've met. And he was unbelievably generous and kind, you know, and I think that's been talked about a little bit, but his generosity was just ridiculous. Like some of the stories I've heard, you know, I won't name names, but I got told about this one artist who's a well-known artist, and they'd become quite, they're in struggle town financially, and they're about to have their house repossessed. And somebody rang Michael, and he didn't owe this person anything. And the rumor goes that he just went bang, rang the bank and paid out the loan. Like he was just so generous and kind, and went out of his way to think of other people constantly and do things for people that he didn't have to. You know, like, you know, I remember he rang me once and he goes, "Oh, do you like the Eagles? The band?" And I was like, "Yeah, they're amazing." And he goes, "I've got a couple of tickets for you." And he didn't owe me anything. He didn't have to do this for me. I wasn't even signed to him at this point. Just ringing, "If you like the Eagles?" "Yeah, no." And I get to this show and I'm thinking they're going to be row Z up the back, unsold tickets. And they weren't. They were Michael's personal row front and center, $600 a seat. They were his tickets.
Yeah.
You know, and I got to take my daughter on a night that we will remember till the day I die. You know, and that was what he was like. He was always thinking of other people, always. So yeah, I just am sad and I miss him, and I'm sad that I won't get to have another conversation with him about you know, the mighty Geelong Footy Club or his Saints, or, you know, all those things. And where does he leave music? Well, he leaves music far better than it was before he got here. You know, the good thing about him was that he was a family man. So his company, Mushroom Music, is a massive family. Like, and it really is. You go in there to Dundas Lane and everybody knows everybody, and they are all caring and kind and supportive and loving. You know, you'd find it really hard signing to another record label, I think, having been with Mushroom, because I doubt that anyone else does family and support like Mushroom do. So yeah, he leaves it in an amazing place.
That's a credit to him.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Where do we need to take, or where do we need to support the Australian music industry post-COVID? Because I know that I'm very outspoken about how the government has not done things great in certain areas due to COVID and what they've done, but particularly for the music industry.
Oh, look, if they were fair income, they'd just keep it going for people in the music industry, but they're not, and they don't care. So, you know, the sooner we can understand that this Liberal government are only interested in things that will benefit them as a party and personally, the better off we'll be. You know, stop expecting, like, you know, 90% of life's disappointment comes from unrealistic expectation. We spend our lives blaming other people and getting upset. That person didn't do that. They didn't do this. They let me down. You know what? It's actually not the other person's fault. It's your fault for having unrealistic expectations. So, you know, as soon as we as a community of artists and of creatives understand that our expectation on this government has to be zero, like still lobby, still try and get more out of them, still put pressure on them, but don't expect anything because they're not going to do it for us, you know. Yeah, look, it's tough. It's tough out there. I'm really fortunate that I've got this side hustle or not side hustle, but I've got this whole thing in education because that continues to pay my bills. But you've also, you know, you've got to take responsibility for yourself as well. Like, you know, I had to pivot last year massively when it all dropped and school got cancelled. I got on the front foot and made a video series and looked for different ways that I could continue doing what I do, you know. So part of it is, yeah, they should do more, but, you know, don't expect them to, because they've shown over time that they're not going to. That they don't care.
How does the Australian public support Australian music now?
Well, firstly, buy merch, pay for your music. Stop streaming on Spotify for, you know, when an artist, you stream my song on Spotify, I get paid less than a percentage of a cent.
Yeah, Cav's told me
Worth
less
nothing.
than 3% or something, 3 cents.
Not in that. It's not even that. It's like 0.016 of a cent when you stream it or something ridiculous. You know, so go to Apple and actually physically pay $9 for the album or $11 for the album or whatever it costs, or even better, get on the website and buy the vinyl from the label.
Yeah.
Buy t-shirts, buy hats, go to shows. When you see bands that you like and they're doing a show, turn up, go on pay and buy a ticket and turn up. You know, that's how you support them.
Buy the albums.
Yep, absolutely.
Buy the albums. Thank you very much for being here today. Did you have anything else you wanted to leave us with, Scott?
No, I think we've covered an immense amount. I appreciate you having me on.
I appreciate you being here. It's been worth the wait.
Yeah, look, see you. Sorry for the
no
delay. Life's been busy.
Life's been busy. Thank you very much for being here, Scott.
No worries, Tony. Thanks for having me, mate.